and thanks for tuning in again to PSLabor Talk. I'm your moderator, James Bishop. With me in the office here is Rick Torres, CEO of Permanent Solutions Labor Consultants. And calling in from Florida, we have Ronaldo Velasquez, a labor lawyer with Ford Harrison in Florida, and Suzanne Geimer, a nurses' rights activist based in Southern California. Ray, Suzanne, how are you today?
Good. How are you doing, James?
Oh, we're doing great. It's nice to have you guys on. Well, today we're going to be talking about right to work, and we've been seeing a trend in right to work recently. We've seen Indiana become a right to work state. Just very recently, Michigan became a right to work state amidst quite a bit of controversy, and there are definitely some other states considering similar legislation. So unions, when you hear the unions talk about right to work, they paint this picture of gloom and doom, lower wages, higher unemployment, less job security, and then you have the supporters of right to work on the other end talk about the higher increase in wages, more jobs. It seems like we're getting some mixed messages here for either side of the field. So I want to address from an employer's standpoint here, what does it mean as a business owner, large or small, to operate in a right-to-work state versus a closed shop state? And I'm really directing this question more at Ray and Rick here. But Suzanne, if you have any insight, feel free to chime right in. Go ahead, Ray.
Sure. I'll tell you what, James. I think from a very basic perspective, the right-to-work laws essentially mean that, employees have the ability to work without necessarily having to pay union dues or become a union member. And I think in its most basic format, that's what it means. But on a much larger scale, employers need to be sure that with respect to the right-to-work legislation in their particular state, that it applies to private sector employers as well as public sector employers, because sometimes the laws differentiate or are more heavy to one side as opposed to the other. I think a good example of that, as a matter of fact, is Wisconsin, which, if I remember correctly, is more geared towards public sector as opposed to the private sector, as opposed to Michigan with the recent legislation there, in Florida, which applies to both private and public sector employers.
So I think an important thing to touch on here is what exactly right to mean legislation means for workers. Now, the basic gist I'm getting here is that you can participate and collect the benefits that union members bargain for. However, you're not required to pay union dues. Is that correct?
In a nutshell, I would say that is correct. And with respect to what does it mean for a large or small business, to be quite honest with you, I think in right-to-work states, employers need to be even more vigilant than in states where the law does not exist. Because the reality of the matter is that you still have to take the necessary steps if you are union-free to remain union-free. And if you do get a union that gets into your workplace and your organization, you have the concern from the employee's perspective that are in right-to-work states that they take the attitude of, well, who cares if the union gets in? After all, I don't have to be in it if I don't want to. So it's a bit of a dangerous attitude to have to deal with from an employer's perspective. So the way I look at it is that if you are in a right-to-work state as an employer, you should be even more vigilant even if you're not.
Yeah, and Ray, I agree with you 100%. Also, a lot of times employers have the misconception that if they're in a right-to-work state, they don't have to deal with the union. And irregardless whether a member is required to pay dues or not, management still has to deal with the union if the union's in there. They still have to go through all the steps. They still have to negotiate. They still have to go through all the processes. If it was a closed shop state, it makes no difference.
Sure, Ray, you had mentioned that, it kind of took the weight off of the decisions from the workers there. They don't have to pay the dues, so their mindset there might shift to, well, I've basically got nothing to lose if the union comes in because I get to reap the benefits and not pay the dues. But I think what employees lose sight of there, is that they will still have to go through a union rep whenever they want to achieve something with their employer, any kind of progress in the workplace. So, Suzanne, I know that was a big sticking point for you when deciding whether or not to invite the nurses union into any of your facilities, and I know you campaign against that now. What were some of your principal concerns there when you saw that union as actually a wall that it inhibited progress in the workplace instead of help the nurses do their jobs?
Well, first of all, I can say completely. When I started learning and listening to what they were telling us, they relit my Florence Nightingale playing big time, because one of the things they bragged about was how the nurses up in Northern California had been on strike for almost a year, and I looked at them, I said, you got to be kidding me, So I said, let me ask you a question. If you were here and you decided to go on strike, are you telling me I couldn't work? I would have to go on strike too, whether I wanted to or not? And they said, oh, yeah, no, you would have to go on strike. And I don't know, it just did something to me, because there is no way that you will ever see me standing out on the sidewalk holding a sign on a stick when I should be inside taking care of patients. Period. End of it. That's it. And they just got me all fired up. So I thought they were bullies. I thought they were, it was just amazing. Another thing that, sorry to go on, but none of them were nurses. And they're talking to me about what they're going to do for me and everything, and not one nurse came to me and said, I want to join this union, and let me tell you why. But they turned all the nurses against each other, and I found it to be a sign of bad things to come. So that's really what lit my fire.
Suzanne, it's kind of funny when people talk about, when we have the conversation with strikes. And as you know, I was a strike director for years, and one of the, and a lot of people don't realize being on strike to the union purist is like a badge of honor. It's because they look at, and Richard Trumka, actually said this in a press conference about a year and a half ago, is that when especially in healthcare, the unions were fighting each other here, the California Nurse Association and the SEIU, that were actually getting into fist fights around Detroit, Michigan, in one of the suburbs. Richard Trumka had a press conference, and he was talking about the feuding and the fighting, and he says, let's come together and find a solution to our problems so that we can put all of our concentration on fighting the real enemy. And when he said the real enemy is management, so when you said that they are fighting and they're turning people against each other, it really comes down to that. I think for me, in my mind, it comes down to that statement where the enemy is management. Well, when did management become the enemy? And if the enemy, how does the union coming into a work facility, whether it be a hospital or it be municipality or a factory, how does that improve conditions when they look at them as being the enemy? And that goes for whether it's a right to work state or a so-called closed shop state.
Sure enough.
Well, they try to make the nurses think they're going to fix everything. Like, for example, maybe the nurses are upset with their nurse manager. Well, the union's not going to come in and hire a nurse manager for you that you like. They're just going to take your dues out of your paycheck. So, I think people are unrealistic about what the union is going to do and not going to do.
Yeah, and they're very savvy, Susan. Yeah, I have to tell you, credit to you to stand up to them, because they're very savvy. They know how to put pressure on folks to make them feel that they have to participate in these strikes and other activities in order to be part of the group. If not, you're on the other side. It's us against them, And it takes a lot to stand up to them. And leadership like yours from within a workplace is very helpful to the other employees that are seeking an alternative to not going into the union and participating in their activities.
Ray, a story to tell you and our listeners is that when I first met Suzanne, she was, they were putting really using high pressure tactics on her, and in fact, she was a one man. I call it a 1-man army, or 1-woman army. I'm sorry, Suzanne, but she was out there speaking her mind, out there doing everything she could to educate nurses in the areas where she was working, and just the bravery of this lady just surprised me. But they were using every tactic, having people try to physically intimidate her, verbally abuse her, and she never blinked and she stood up. But how many people across the country? And Ray, me and you have talked about this before when we talked about organizing tactics and strategies that the unions try to bring to the table when they're organizing workers. How many people have that strength or that internal confidence to stand up? And it is intimidating. It is intimidating. And in my past, that's what I used to do. That was my job, is to intimidate people into just being quiet or go along, or at the very least just not stand up and voice their opinion on the organizing activities that are going on.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rick. And I got to tell you, you and I experienced it at a distance. And Suzanne being on the front line and fighting back like that is really very impressive, because the irony of unions is that as much as they go out there and they preach how they want to be all inclusive and they want to spread the good word, the reality of it when you get down to the nitty gritty of their campaigns is that they suppress opinions. If you're not part of their plan, they don't want you communicating. They don't want you to educate. So when they see someone like Suzanne who's going out there and saying, hey, look, there's an alternative, and this is what it is, instead of encouraging that communication and letting the worker make an educated decision, they go after the folks like Suzanne. And it's really unfortunate. But again, as we're pointing out, great credit to her for fighting the fight.
You know what helped me the most, and what I like so much about Rick's company and what he's doing, that was a long time ago, and he's grown a lot since then and built this great opportunity for people to learn. But I had an opportunity to speak with him one day, and he explained to me the thought process behind and how the game is played. And once I understood what they were doing and what they were about and what their tactics were, I kind of, it's like playing a chess game. Once you understand it, you can figure out your next move. And then I realized that if I backed off, that was exactly what they wanted. So, they just sticked on a long nerve, I guess.
Yeah. But, it's one of the wonderful things that Rick's company provides, really, is the type of first-hand experience that he can communicate to folks like you that are in the front lines and employers, because he's been there. He was the guy that, you were fighting with, you know what I'm saying? So he provides some valuable insight to help folks like you and employers fight the good fight, no doubt.
I think another thing was that they didn't understand was years ago, I kind of done my career backwards. I was a director of nursing of a small hospital in South Carolina. And so I kind of understood management and staff nurse. I kind of see it from both sides, and I don't really see management as the enemy. But I understand the importance of being able to communicate effectively with management, because, they can't read your mind. And so I think that also helped me a little bit in the battle, as I called it, because it was a battle that, I was not going to let them win.
So we've seen recently, like I had mentioned before, this trend in right-to-work states. More that legislation's being passed, more of it's being discussed. What I want to ask here, and this is once again probably more for Rick and Ray, do the unions really shy away from right-to-work states? Or, we touched on that psychology of the worker before, maybe taking some of the weight off of that decision. Do the unions still target those right-to-work states because of that perceived psychological change?
One of the first things that management would do when they start talking to workers would talk to them about union dues. Is one of the things, because once again, it's when there's an organizing campaign, nobody's reinventing the wheel, either the union or management. And one of the legitimate discussions that we have with workers in a so-called closed shop state is as far as what is their financial obligation to the union, and not just financial. Is signing a piece of paper. There's some unions that have you have to say a pledge to them, and different locals in different regions are different, but in some way, shape, or form, you have to obligate yourself to the union in a closed shop state, and that's one of the conversations that we have with workers. And when I was an organizing director, there's many times we went into right to work states, and it actually, in a way, on the organizing level, it was much easier to organize, even if the successes may not be as great because you have other political things, but it by far it doesn't distract unions from organizing, because all we could say is that, listen, you have the final word on saying whether we're doing a good job or not. We have to do a good job for you, because if not, you're going to choose not to pay dues. So if we're not doing a good job for you, or if you don't feel that our organization, the union, whatever union it is really complementing your unit, or if you don't feel that you are the driving force behind the unit itself or the local, then you can choose to walk away. So we, as an organization, as an institution, have to make sure that we bring you above and make sure that you are the voice within that facility, because if not, then you're just going to make the choice not to pay dues. So if we along with you do a great job for you and help you advance, then you're going to continue to exist because you're going to continue to pay dues. If not, then you're gonna vote with your wallet that we're not doing good. In many ways, it's easier.
Yeah, I don't think really that it unions shy away from right to work states. I think that, as we all know, they are a business, and in the grand scheme of things, they take an approach of some is better than none. So, and I think unions are focusing in on industries and employers that allow them the opportunity to get in and organize their employees. And that doesn't matter whether you're in a closed shop state or whether you're in a right to work state. So I really don't think it acts as a deterrent. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think in right to work states you have to be even more vigilant. And taking actually Florida as an example, which has been a right to work state for some time now, almost every public sector entity in the state is organized. And in the private sector, in recent years, we've seen an uptick in the healthcare industry. Where Susanna comes from out west, well, here in Florida, we've seen a lot of activity with CNA and SEIU organizing nurses. So I would say that it's not a deterrent at all.
No, in fact, you talk about, Ray, you're talking about unions like the CNA, the California Nurses Association, which Suzanne has a lot of experience with. In fact, I was one of the people who was instrumental putting together a organizing agreement or a merge together between what was the United Steelworkers and the California Nurses Association back years ago. And one of the goals was to actually, to cover everything in California, as Suzanne can tell you better than anybody, that how aggressive they have been in California. But to take that that horse and pony show on the road. And some of the states that when we were putting together that merge between the Steelworkers and the California Nurses Association, one of the things that we were discussing as far as strategy, long-term strategy, was to actually go after many of those right-to-work states or those non-traditional heavy organizing states. We were attracted by that, and we wanted to take that merge and really attack those. In many of the states were right-to-work states, because we knew that it wasn't going to affect in a large scale our organizing numbers or the dues that we bring in, because everything's about the numbers as far as how much money that you're collecting when you're organizing versus how much money you spend for the organizing campaign. Because it's Ray's right, it's a business. He's 100% right on. It's a business, and they look at how much money do we expend versus how much money do we get back in in exchange for that investment, and that's all it is an investment. But once again, those right-to-work states, being a right-to-work state or a closed-shop state, had no deterrent on our organizing strategy nationwide.
And can I say something about the one thing that really irritated me was the CNA, which is now, it changes its name periodically. It became real clear to me that they were using the dues of the California nurses to go try to get other states. It wasn't like they were using California nurses dues to help them in California that much. And, they are a business. They're a big business. And the person who was doing all the speaking about nursing isn't even a nurse. And when I brought that to the attention of a news person that was interviewing me, he was dumbfounded. He thought that this person that was doing all this talk about what nurses need was a nurse. And when I explained to him that at that time there were 300,000 registered nurses in the state of California, and only, let's say, 73,000 of those would belong to the CNA, he was like dumbfounded. He said, well, why haven't you told us that? And I said, well, nobody asked me. You're too busy writing things as if every nurse in California is a member of this organization, and they're not. So they have a big budget. They have the ability to get the press, get their word out, and they make it seem as if they are even bigger than they are. And so I think it's important for people who are not members of that and who do believe in nursing and want to stand up for nursing need to be able to do that too.
And I think that point's especially poignant in the healthcare field that you work in, Suzanne. You have to ask yourself when you're considering joining a union, and especially like a nurses union, any kind of service union there, how does it benefit my client? How does it benefit the patients? And, from what you're saying, it sounds like the union's spending money on advertising, and other states spending money trying to improve their public profile. And you have to ask yourself, how is that improving patient care? And how is that improving, nurse compensation?
Right.
So I think we touched.
Once the dues go into the union's possession, it's essentially their money, and they're going to spend it in a manner in which is going to likely bring them more money. And when I say them, I mean the union themselves and the people that run the union. Yeah,
Ray. Yeah. You're right on, Ray. When I was on the other side and working for with big labor, it's all about what's good for the institution. And the institution meaning the international. It's not what's good for the local, because you know, Ray, as well as I do, is that a lot of the money, or a good percentage of the money, goes to the international, and they spend it any way that they want. And they're looking at, as you said, well, how are we going to make more money? And so taking that money and not using it towards the local person who's a union member at a whether it be a small or large local, how's it going to benefit them? That doesn't even come into play. It's about what's going to advance us as an institution, and money drives that. It's what is, when I was on the other side, what do I have to do to advance me, not only because of the institution that I belong to, but personally, how is this going to advance me within this institution? So there's a lot of egos, there's a lot of things that drive union strategy, and I tell you what, there's so many things that you pick up a newspaper, you listen to the radio or to the TV, and there's so many things that unions are doing, and you're saying, well, how and all the money comes from members, the local members who doesn't really have an understanding, a lot of them, exactly where the dues money goes. And how is this benefiting, as Suzanne said, how is this benefiting that local person? Because such a small portion of that money that they're paying in their dues, and this is hardship dues money. I mean, they're paying a good percentage of money, these union members. How does that actually advancing the union member, right, Suzanne?
Yes, and it's just when I saw their budget one day, that's what really amazed me. I mean, I said to myself, I'm certainly not giving any of my money for this. So I just think people don't. Another thing, nurses are too busy at the bedside working. They don't, they don't understand all those things. They don't get a chance to see that. They don't really understand it. And then they believe the person who's just bullying them into thinking that this is what they need. So I think for people listening to this that are in HR or that are managers, one thing I wanted to point out, I think because I have been a nurse for so long, I think a lot of mistakes that people make, let's say they have a manager who's been there for 20, 30 years, and they're still using I call it the Marie Antoinette style of management, talk with your bed, let them eat cake, this is policy, so what? You can't, with today's nurse, you can't do that. Well, you shouldn't do that anyway, but I think there's a whole new breed of thinking, there's a whole new breed of nursing out there. People are, it's easy for them to just quit and go someplace else. And I think if you're not listening to what they're saying, then you're just not being very smart. Because if you just listen and give them a chance to participate and have a voice, then you shouldn't need a union. You should all be doing this together.
Absolutely. And Ray, you as an attorney, you when you're talking to your clients, you look at the same thing I look at. You're looking at the financial reports of these unions, and you see the absurd way that they spend the dues money, the members' money. Sometimes you have to close the sheet and because it's almost unbelievable at times.
Yeah, I handled a campaign last year in a small municipality here in Florida for some law enforcement folks representing the city in a union drive. And, when I provided those figures to the employees that were going to be voting for or against the union, to educate them in terms of where their money was going to be going, and they saw some of the salary that the members of the police union, the particular police union at issue, were making, it shocked the conscience. I mean, that was one of the biggest impacts we had in that campaign, and we were successful in prevailing and keeping the union out, and that was one of the primary reasons, because they realized, where's my money going? It's certainly not going to be here. And it has a huge impact. And to circle back to what you were saying, Suzanne, listening, absolutely right. Because if HR folks and managers are not listening to what their employees are saying, whether it's good, bad, or middle of the road, then that opens them up to go take those concerns to a third party, and that third party, more likely than not, is going to wind up being the union.
Right.
Sure.
Yep.
I want to address. It seems like we have some differing forces lately. It's in the labor law world. We have a very pro-union National Labor Relations Board with a pro-union administration, but we are seeing, on the other hand, this push towards right to work in numerous states. I want to address Ray, Rick, and Suzanne. I know you've been working with nurses all across the country in efforts to resist forced unionization there. Where do you think we're going to be headed here? Are we going to shy away from right to work in most states, or do you think this trend will continue and we'll be seeing more right to work legislation in the next few years?
Well,
I think more people are going to want right to work. I mean, if I was in, I think it's, the more people see in the paper that people are going that way, I just say hooray for them, and I think it encourages other people.
One of the things that unions are doing to kind of counter that is kind of funny. And in fact, we did a podcast on that a couple months ago. Was that they're trying to, like in Michigan, and I don't know if you heard of this, Ray and Suzanne, but in Michigan they actually had on the ballot an amendment to make unionizing a constitutional right. And so, if that would have passed, then it would have made it impossible for the right to work states to happen. So they're looking at other unique ways to kind of stop that. Yeah. So, and I think, and in fact, I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal about a week and a half ago, where where this topic is starting to kind of rear its ugly head more and more. Where they're trying to take this and put it to a vote on the ballot to where it would make being a right to work state illegal. So I don't know how much kind of traction that's going to get, but I know that's one of the things that they're looking at.
Yeah, and on that issue, I really think that it's really politically driven in terms of. I mean, if you look at the most recent states that have gone right to work, which is Michigan, Indiana, and I believe Wisconsin. I know for certain that Indiana, the governor at the time, was Republican, and they had a supermajority. Michigan was a Republican governor with a majority in both houses, the Republicans. And I think that the same is true for Wisconsin. And I think that, irrespective of where you fall politically from a citizen's perspective, as Suzanne was pointing out, look, it affords people a choice. And that's why unions oppose it, because they don't want the individual to be able to decide. The union wants to make that decision for them. The right to work in its most simplest form puts the power in the hands of the people. So whether you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent, as a citizen, it's beneficial to you because you ultimately decide if a union does come in, whether you want to pay dues or not and be a member of that organization.
Right, in a closed-shop state, unions are basically banking on that tyranny of the majority there. As soon as you have enough people that support the union, everyone else in that workplace is forced to pay those union dues.
Absolutely right, James. Absolutely right.
It's funny. It's funny that unions talk about, we're a democratic institution and we believe in democracy. And every time you pick up a newspaper or hear a union official talk, and they're always talking about democracy. But coming back from the other side, from being a union official, ex-union official, I want to clarify that. Is that there is no democracy there, and there is no democracy there. In fact, the internal politics of unions dictate that it is a top-down, type of organization, and the power is in the hands of a few. And it's the same way with on the shop floor or in the local union hall, that the power is in the few, and anybody who doesn't go along with it, then there's repercussions for their going against the majority.
Yeah, and those consequences, as you know, Rick, either during the time that you were actually enforcing the consequences or now, battling against them are pretty severe. And again, going back to the point of why I think right to work legislation is very important. And at the end of the day, it puts the power in the person's hand to decide whether they want to be a part of it or not.
Well, I just like the term right to work. Like I said in the beginning, I would never, ever, ever participate in a strike. I don't think that nurses should ever go on strike. So I want the right to work in my own hospital and take care of my patients as I see fit. And if somebody else wants to be on strike, good for them, but it's not for me. And I think that nurses should respect each other as professionals. And I think the disappointing thing for me during my time was the way some of the nurses that wanted the union refused to talk to me. So how do you get somebody to come over to your side? Do you ignore them and treat them like a bully? Or do you treat them with respect and have a discussion together? So I think that no matter what, we should all respect the right for each person to decide themselves. And that's what I like about being a right to work state. If you don't want to be in the union, you're not in the union. But you should still be able to work together.
Nobody... I'm sorry, Ray, go ahead.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, into James, underlying question is, I think that the more you see the National Labor Relations Board going forward with the types of policies that they're putting into place, that's making organization and unions getting into workplaces easier. I think the trend at the state level will be to look towards right-to-work legislation, and that's going to be particularly true in instances where the state at the time either has a Republican governor or Republican Senate and House.
And Ray, some of that legislation you're talking about there, I'm assuming you're referencing those shotgun organizing campaigns, the new rules that limiting the campaigns down to 15 days. And back from the month and a half or so you get now to run a campaign, as well as some other things that didn't quite get passed, but we're definitely gaining some momentum, and we're basically just waiting for those to pass now.
I think that's absolutely right, James. You basically get, the employer gets noticed, and at the pace that things are going, they barely have time to get their feet on the floor and going before they've got an election on their hands.
Sure.
The only entity that wins there is the union, because it prevents the employer to go through the process of educating and properly campaigning so that the employee that's voting makes an educated decision.
Go back on some of the things that Suzanne was saying earlier, and bring it to this topic. Some of there's been from the other side. There's a breakdown in communications is the biggest cause of why employees, whether they be a nurse or a machine operator or whoever, the reason why they start going to a union is because there's a breakdown in communications. The management's not listening, or for whatever reason they're not communicating. A union can be in a facility, and I know facilities, and especially in healthcare, where you can keep things kind of under the table and quieter for a longer period of time. There's been times when, in fact, in California, when we were putting together this merge between the steelworkers and the California Nurses Association, there was one facility that we were in for over a year. And the whole point of time, and it's the union's job to create a anger and an us against them mentality against management. And now, with the time limits that we have now, it is very hard, especially because the union can become entrenched into your organization for a long period of time. How do you, from a practical point of view, how do you correct that in 5, 10, 15 days? How do you have the ability to do that? That's why when I say when and not if, when this reduced timeline actually takes place, it's going to be even more essential, even more important that management takes the steps, as Suzanne was talking about, to make sure that they communicate, that they talk, that they listen to the people, because without that, 5, 10, 15 days is going to be impossible. And as you said, Ray,
right.
I mean, just being able to find out what's happening is going to be impossible. To be able to educate your employees in time for you to have a successful, outcome of the election.
Yeah, it's right, Rick. Now more than ever, given the direction that we're heading, employers need to be vigilant, need to keep the avenues of communication with their employees open, and make sure that they keep unions out, because once they're in, and if the employer's living in the dark and not receptive and not listening to what's happening, by the time they get that petition, it's a done deal. It'll be a done deal.
Well,
yeah, and I talked with people, back when they were trying to get into our hospital, from other hospitals around that voted for the union, and then within a year, they were crying the blues and wanting to know how to get them out. So that's a whole lot harder to get them out.
Exactly. A decertification campaign is a lot more strenuous than most people would assume. It seems way easier to get a union into a workplace than it is to get them out.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Ray and Suzanne, I want to thank you both for being on today. It was great talking to both of you. I hope you enjoy your comparatively warm and sunny weather while we stride through these record lows in Michigan, and I hope to talk to both of you soon.
Likewise,
Thanks,
James.
Rod.
Stay warm over there.
Oh, we'll do our best.
Take care, Suzanne. Nice talking to you. See you, Rick.
Thank you both.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.